I think many people who think of retirement think, am I going to run out of money? How do I know that I'm not going to run out of money?
Our number one goal for every client of ours is to do everything we can do so they don't run out of money. Let's be intentional with your money. I don't care how much your money is, but let's be intentional with it. In other words, let's decide what you want to do and then let us build in that equation to see if it makes sense for you.
Do you have one tip that you've given to your kids?
Don't borrow money on depreciating assets. Be intentional about what you want to do, because oftentimes what happens is if you don't design the life you want, you run the risk of drifting into a life that you maybe didn't want. Welcome to the Retire and Thrive podcast, where we're focused on helping you live your life with purpose, wealth, and confidence.
That's right. I'm Kamie. This is Dan. And we are focusing today on some lessons that Dan has chalked up. You have 7 lessons, and we're focusing today on lesson 1 because we are hoping to educate you, people of all ages too, by the way. We're hoping this podcast resonates with people of different ages, but especially those who are entering retirement, or maybe you're already in retirement. So today we're focusing on lesson 1, as I mentioned. Dan, remind us again. We touched on it in our last episode, but what is lesson 1?
And lesson 1 is enjoying the fruits of your labor.
So a lot of people probably go into retirement, maybe not a lot, but I think many people who think of retirement think, am I going to run out of money? How do I know that I'm not going to run out of money?
Great question. And that's part of what we help people do, is to try to run through some of those numbers about, do I have enough to retire on? And I think that probably, Kamie, is the number one question that we get asked is, how long is this thing going to last? Am I going to run out of money? Or what happens if the market goes down? Or what happens if I have unexpected expenses? So I think that probably would be our number one question. What happens if I run out of money? Or how do I know that I'm not going to run out of money?
When we look at these lessons, you had 7 lessons. Why did you decide this was the right one to start with?
Because I think it's crucial. I think it's very important that people focus on, where they're at in terms of financially, and are they able to have that freedom. And it could be not just the financial freedom, but, part of this, as we'll get into today's episode, some of it is just the freedom to be given permission to enjoy life.
Freedom, that's a big part of thriving.
Right.
Definitely when it comes to money. So when we look at our lives, many folks' lives, we work. And then it's time to, retire and have that freedom. How can people be confident that they have the money saved up to survive?
Yeah, and I think that ties into the title of the book, Retire and Thrive. So the retire part is really about, how do I know I've got enough money to live happily ever after? And part of that is we run numbers backwards and forwards and different scenarios of different types of retirement and income sources, all of that. So that's more the retirement part. And so I would tell you, there's probably never a meeting when I meet with someone for the first time that I tell them our number one goal for every client of ours is to do everything we can do so they don't run out of money.
So a lot of people have been saving their entire lives, especially the generation that is retiring now. They've been saving. And you've mentioned to me that a lot of people you meet with, they might struggle from changing from saving to now spending. I get to spend some of this money, because they get a bit nervous probably when it comes to, how much money do I have? How much can I spend?
Right.
Can I give this money to my grandkid? Can I go on this trip? What do you deal with, and how do you help people navigate through that?
Which that ties into the second part. The second word of the book is thrive. And, we'd mentioned it on episode 2 that we are just so accustomed to saving, or what I call the accumulation phase, that sometimes it's very difficult to shift over to the spending mode. My parents were part of, we call it the Bob Hope generation. They were born in the 20s. And so that was a whole different era, going through the Great Depression. They remember how difficult things really were. But even now, people that are not part of that generation, more the baby boom generation, it's just, once they've been saving for 30 years, 40 years, they're not in the mindset to spend money. But part of it is that they've never had the ability to spend money because they've saved and if they've raised kids. But second of all, they just want to make sure they don't run out of money.
Right.
And which is a big thing.
Right. And I have a little story off of that. My grandparents, they've done very well for themselves. They have clearly managed their retirement properly, but we always kind of joke about it a little bit because when we go out to eat, like we'll go when we're down in Arizona because they're snowbirds from us in the Midwest. We have many snowbirds, but they retire down there in the winter and we'll like go to Jack in the Box and they'll have a coupon for a McMuffin that we can get in the morning. And that's what we'll eat. That's what they do. My grandma gets the off-brand ketchup. And then at Christmas, we have all the grandkids and we all get a pretty big chunk of change from them. And in our minds, as a young kid, it's just like, first of all, you're very grateful because you're like, my goodness, they're using the off-brand ketchup and then giving us a nice gift at Christmas. And it's just kind of that mentality. It's like you could probably get the regular ketchup, the Heinz ketchup, or maybe go to a nice restaurant instead of going to Jack in the Box. But it's just the way they grew up. And they're still thinking of that saving mindset, but then they also care about their loved ones and they want to. So it's really nice, but it's just interesting because today's day and age, I look at my friends or myself. We'll go to a restaurant, you're dropping $100 to $50 to $100 on a 2-person meal. And that's just not what my grandparents are used to.
Well, and you mentioned it in the previous episode. You grew up as a farm girl. And so part of that is ingrained. Again, not to stereotype here, but part of it is just the frugality of growing up in that type of environment. And so I think when you talked about grandparents gifting money to the grandchildren, I think maybe they're getting nudged by their attorney to say it's probably a good idea.
Sure.
But also they want to see you enjoy it. And we have those same discussions with clients too, is, your kids are now in their 50s and you're in your mid to late 70s. Would you like to see your kids enjoy it? Do you want to do some gifting now, or would you rather wait and have them receive everything once you're gone? And so again, kind of like your grandparents, we would encourage people to gift if, it's not going to, come with an adverse consequence that the kids expected every year. So, but again, I think some of that is just growing up in that generation with your grandparents. I think some of it's just they're frugal people. Mm-hmm. They just don't throw money away. And that's a very fine line that we have discussions with. In fact, I was talking with an attorney just a couple of months ago, and it was an interesting perspective. He was talking to a client of his. He said, this guy's worth north of $50 million. And he says, just got all kinds of money. And he said, he asked his client, he said, so I assume, you fly first class. And this business owner looked at me and says, my wife and I have never flown first class. And the attorney just kind of smiles at him and he says, I'll bet your kids will when you're gone. And he looked at the attorney and said, never really thought of that. And the attorney said, I'm telling you they will, because I've seen it. I've seen it over the years.
Right.
But again, going back to your grandparents, that's just the mindset is why would you spend an extra, whatever, $500, $1,000, $1,500 on an air seat on an airline to go from point A to point B?
Yeah.
So what if I'm cramped and I'm next to someone? That just doesn't resonate with them. But when this attorney was telling me the story, I thought, I have clients the same way that they always fly coach and they're worth a lot of money too.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's definitely interesting. And we've mentioned this numerous times, like I'm in my 30s and I just feel like folks and my friends are a little different than folks who are in that retirement stage. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with people paying attention and looking ahead to their retirement? I know you're dealing with a lot of folks that are in their 50s and 60s, but you probably deal with a few people on the younger end of things. How can you help them?
It's, I kind of use this analogy with the younger generation. So let's take you, Kamie, in your 30s. If we change the direction, or if we change your, for example, rate of return or dollar amount that you're contributing to your retirement, between now and the next 30 years, it can have a significant impact. And the analogy I use is if I'm on an airplane and I am flying from Minneapolis to Chicago and I'm off 5 degrees, I might end up 30, 40 miles west of Chicago. But if I'm flying from Minneapolis to LA and I'm off 5 degrees, I might be 400 miles off track. And so it's kind of that same analogy for you. If you're 50 years old and you get an extra 1% return, it definitely helps. But when you're in your 30s and you get an extra 1% return, potentially depending on what you're contributing, and it could be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, we're talking a little bit about the effect of compound interest. So rate of return is a big thing when we're talking to, the younger generation, but it's also the amount. if somebody's saving $100 a month and we encourage them to do $200 a month, the amount of compound values at the end of that 30, 35 years is massive. So, and I'm sure your parents or grandparents, said to you when you were young, Kamie, save while you can because, you need to start early. You need to start early.
Well.
And when you're in 20s, it's like, well, why would retirement? I mean, that's 40 years away. I'm not going to start early, because like you said, I want to enjoy some of the fruits of my labor. The book doesn't necessarily pertain to the 30-year-olds enjoying the fruits of their labor. It's really that second piece of the book, which is really that thrive. It's really that chapter that you've worked so hard to get, and now it's time to really dial it up and enjoy and check a lot of boxes that maybe you couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah, and we'll get back to the retirement age in just a bit, but I want to pick your brain because you are a father, you are a parent. Do you have one tip that you've given to your kids when it comes to finances? What is the one thing that you've instilled in them that is so important? Probably many things, but is there one thing that really sticks out?
Yeah, there's lots of things that stick out to me, and I'll try to stick to two. Maybe I'll start with that. Most importantly is the impact of compound interest in starting early and taking advantage of whatever employer-sponsored retirement plans you have with the match and everything else. And again, I don't want to take the whole episode and go into a lot of details about that, but it is important because by starting at age 25 versus waiting until 35, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars based on what you're contributing difference, even though your actual contribution by contributing for an extra 10 years, let's just say it's an extra $20,000 that you've contributed, but the additional amount of compound value at the end of that 30, 35-year period might be $100,000 to $200,000.
Right.
So that would be probably my first thing. The other thing, which this may not be popular, but I just instilled it in my kids at a very young age and for those of you that have kids and want to share this, I'm a big believer in not taking on a lot of debt on assets that go down in value. In other words, don't borrow money on depreciating assets.
Sure.
And so borrow money on your home, but don't borrow money on ATVs, on boats, things of that nature. It's great to have those recreational things. And again, I won't go on the slippery slope on the cars because I don't want to offend anybody that has car loans. But at the end of the day, if you are borrowing a lot of money on a car that maybe you can only afford the payment, cars do depreciate in value.
Right.
And so I've just kind of conveyed the message to them, don't borrow money on assets that depreciate rapidly.
Yeah. Some good advice there. Some good advice and some things to think about. What matters to you? What's most important to you? So let's get back to folks who are retiring in that age and folks that are maybe working with their retirement and making sure that they have enough money to do certain things. How do you help these clients get clarity that they have enough money to do certain things? Maybe they want to get new carpet in their homes. A lot of people that age probably don't. If I look at my grandparents, it's like, my goodness, you have the same carpet for the last 30, 40 years. But if they want to maybe redo the kitchen or go on that trip, maybe a family trip, how can you help them make them comfortable to actually do those things?
Yeah, and I think great question. And, our number one focus has always been looking at the financial picture, looking at the cash flow. Do you have enough money? I had some clients in yesterday, and her question to me is, well, what happens if I go into a nursing home?
Right.
And her name was Kathy. And I said, well, Kathy, if you go into a nursing home, you're in your late 60s. So I can tell you that my mom, who passed a few years ago at 91 years old, she was at a local nursing care facility. I told this to the client yesterday, as I said, the last check we wrote to them was a little north of $11,000 for the month. So I said, it's really difficult for us to project what nursing home costs are going to be, let alone if you're going to be in a nursing home in 20 years. So I think for her, it was more about, let's dial up and do the things that's really important to you. And that may be everything from, whether it's flying first class or whether it's taking that trip to Europe or whether it's remodeling the kitchen. So the way I look at it for us is the number one thing is we want to do everything we can and build their plan around all of the things they really want to do. But behind that, and I tell people that, once you reach a certain age, oftentimes what I've seen is that people aren't able to take those trips overseas. Maybe it's their health. Maybe it's physically they can't do it. And so there is this window where they can enjoy it. And we embrace that. We encourage people. And then when we were showing the numbers and we're kind of looking this out, and it's like, rather than just doing things haphazardly, let's be intentional with your money. I don't care how much your money is, but let's be intentional with it. In other words, let's decide what you want to do, and then let us build in that equation to see if it makes sense for you.
Right. Reframing enjoyment. That's part of thriving. And it's something you touch on. How do you deal with that? I mean, you have these people that come in and you work with them. Do you have some people that leave and they're still like, I don't think I can do this?
Yeah, we had some people just last year, and kind of ended a little bit on a sad note, but and again, that's part of our business, is it's not always the best ending. But we had some clients of ours that I remember they came in, and just kind of as they were walking out the door, they said, well, yeah, now we've got our third grandson who's graduating from high school, and he's our last one. And I said, wow. I said, when's the graduation? He said, in 2 weeks. And I said something to the effect, I said, well, that'll be fun for you guys to reconnect. And he said, I don't think we're going to go. And I said, what do you mean you're not going to go? And he said, well, with the price of airline tickets and everything. And they were healthy enough, Kamie. It was just, they just didn't feel like they should spend the money and drop the $1,000, $1,500. Which I knew their son, and he certainly would have paid for the tickets, but, kind of like your grandparents, pretty proud.
Right.
And they had plenty of money. Mm-hmm. And so we just had the conversation, and I just encouraged them. I just said, take that trip. It was actually out in New Jersey, and they did. And literally just in the last couple of months, he had passed away. And I thought, that's what life's about when you're in that retirement stage, because you just don't know, how long we're going to be here. But you need to embrace it. And so for us, some of it's almost like they need the permission to say, it's okay. Go ahead and spend the money you worked for.
Right. And that's a good point. It goes back to us talking about moving from that saving to spending a little bit more. And when you meet different people have different mindsets. And I deal with that a lot when I look at my mom and my sister. Very different when it comes to, where your finances are going. Sometimes it's all about money. Sometimes it's all about experiences and having that time with your loved ones and doing those things. Do you find it difficult working with people? Do you find it difficult to look at some people who are constantly thinking about money, constantly saving, and then all of a sudden we got to focus on thriving a little bit, because that's a big part of it, is, as that story you just mentioned, things that you'll enjoy and things that you're investing in for your health and your well-being and your mentality, and, doing the things that you want to do, because it can be stressful when you're constantly just thinking about money. It gets annoying.
It does. And, you've even brought it to my attention too. And I didn't really think about it from this perspective, but at the end of the day, money's kind of boring. I mean, it's a necessary tool to do the things you want to do, but it's not the physical, tangible paper money that we like. Nobody gets a lot of satisfaction holding a $100 bill. What gives them the satisfaction is what the $100 bill can do for them. And that ties into this whole lifestyle thing. And so for us, I think giving them that green light to say it's okay, and I'm not necessarily a fan of saying you deserve it, but they do.
Yeah.
I mean,
you do. You do. You've been working your butt off for that many years, and probably sacrificing things here and there to continue to live a good life and have money after finally saying, I'm done working and retiring. You've worked in this business how many years? Remind me.
Long time.
35 years. So you've been working with clients for 35 years, dealing with different people and their finances. And you've been talking about enjoying the fruits of your labor. Is there anything in your 35 years that you've consistently seen in folks who walk in and it's like, we didn't do things right. Maybe we can't enjoy as much as we wanted to. Is there anything in particular that different people consistently do that you've noticed is a hindrance to their retirement?
Yeah, I think some of it is, just choices that they've made. And again, when you're in that accumulation phase, Kamie, it's sometimes it's just, I refer to it as you either enjoy life now or you enjoy it later. Mm-hmm. But you can have a balance. You can have both. And, it's a little bit of a corny phrase to say, but when it comes to retirement, it's all about deferred gratification. I can enjoy everything now, or I can just defer some of that. And again, everybody's different. Some people make $35,000 a year. Some people make $350,000 a year. So saving 10% for one is different than saving 10% for another. But I also want to just say that it goes back to living life with intentionality. It's like even with your money or your lifestyle, be intentional about what you want to do, because oftentimes what happens is if you don't design the life you want, you run the risk of drifting into a life that you maybe didn't want. And so some of that intentionality is, we go through some exercises with some of our clients as they're approaching retirement, and we literally will sit down with them. And, one of the things that I find is kind of a fun little exercise is I'll take a piece of paper and I will draw 6 lines, which represents 7 different columns. And I'll just not show them this piece of paper, but I'll ask them, I'll say, tell me what's important to you in retirement. What does retirement look like to you? And of course, oftentimes it's, I want to travel. I want to go golfing. I want to go fishing. All of these different hobbies that maybe they didn't have enough time to do when they were working. And so then I basically get more granular with them. Okay, well, what days would you golf? How often would you golf? Would you golf in the morning, afternoon? And I've got 2 lines drawn in the paper. So I'm saying if it's in the morning, well, I would for sure go golfing on Tuesdays and Fridays. And so we write this down. We go through this little exercise. It takes 5 minutes. Anything else that you want to do, I'll ask them. And they'll say, no, I think that's about it. I turn the piece of paper over and I'm like, there's a lot of white space here. What is it you want to do to fill in this white space?
Yeah.
And that exercise alone, I can tell you, at least 5, 6, 7 people have said, I guess I really never thought about it. And maybe I should pause on retirement because I thought all of these hobbies I was going to do, but you're right. And so that gets back to be intentional and design the life you want to, because the life that you have when you're in your 30s, 40s, and even early 50s is a lot different than when you're in your 60s and 70s.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people, when they retire too, are just overwhelmed with the financial side of it. But a lot of their identity is taken away because their identity is tied into where they were at, their employer, and the colleagues and the friends that they've developed. So it's a lot going on in retirement. It's not just about the finances.
Yeah. You are your job, but you're not your job.
Right.
There's a lot more to you, a lot of different people out there. You deal with a lot of folks who grew up, we keep touching on this, that saving mentality. And now we're trying to spend a little bit. Are a lot of people concerned with where things are at right now in the economy? I mean, things are more expensive. It's no secret. Things cost a lot more money right now than they did 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. So do you deal with a lot of folks that are very concerned with where things are headed? Can prices go up anymore in some regard? In some spots, I'm like, there's no way. Yeah. We have to reach that top, especially in a market that we live in, just looking at houses in Rochester, Minnesota. Prices are high and they've gone down a little bit already. But are people concerned?
Definitely people are concerned. And it's not just housing prices, it's everything.
Food, anything. Go to the grocery store.
I hear it all the time. And you hear it all the time. And your friends and your family, it's the same way. We won't name specific stores because I think it's very broad. It's across the board with what's going on, politically. I had a contractor in here yesterday, very large contractor, employs north of 100 employees. And he said, this tariff thing bottlenecked us big time. He said, we've got multi-million-dollar jobs going right now that we're going to take a hit on because we bid this thing out, we started it, and now all of a sudden we're having the impact of these additional costs. We can't pass them along to our current jobs. We can pass them along to the future. And so I asked him, I said, what kind of numbers are you looking at? He said, across the board, 25% increases. And I said, how does that affect you as a business owner? He said, here's the whole story. We pass that cost along to the end user. The end user, in essence, it gets back to the consumer. So all of this happening, whether you agree or disagree with the tariffs, that's not what this podcast is about. At the end of the day, to touch on what you're saying, it's exactly right. I mean, it's us consumers who pay the price for this. It's not big businesses that pay the price, because what do? They pass along the cost. When we were in 2022, 2023, where we saw massive, massive inflation, right after COVID with all the stimulus money, I remember going to my favorite grocery store that I never, ever spent more than $150. And all of a sudden I'm spending $225, $250. And I'm just shocked that, and again, I'm just a general average consumer, just like you are. Right. So yeah, it's definitely on everybody's mind. And I know you're going to ask me to bring out the crystal ball, but I don't know where it all ends.
Right. But I do like, how important is it for people to have a budget and to schedule things and be organized? Because just that little tidbit that you touched on with you putting down, you could fish on Tuesday, you could golf on this day. How much does that really help people when it comes to finances and just life in general?
Yeah, I think it's important. Very, very few people have a budget, by the way. And when people are approaching retirement, one of the core things that we zero in on is what would you anticipate your monthly spend would be? I mean, we factor in all the taxes and everything. We're just saying, if you've got a mortgage, we factor that in. If there's other debt, be it on a car, whatever, we factor all of that in. We do a separate line item for travel and property taxes, all of that. But when it comes to a budget, we just had someone yesterday for the very first time, and we sat down and asked her when she retires, she's single, what her budget is. And she's like, I don't know. I make $80,000 a year. Does that help? And I'm like, no, it doesn't help. How much do you anticipate spending on clothing and cable and all of that? So whether you do an actual budget or not, when you get closer to retirement, it's important to know what your budget would be and what it, quite frankly, Kamie, what you want it to be.
Yeah. One final question here for you, Dan. It seems pretty simple, but I just want to hear your answer. Why is it so important to enjoy the fruits of your labor?
Great question. We work way too hard. And I'm not an international traveler, but I have been over to Europe a couple times, and I know they've got it figured out. They take off 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks in the summertime, and we're slaving away. But honestly, life is a gift, and we just never know when things change for us. And so it is important to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And I think my final statement I would make, and I think I try to live this, I try to convey this message to all of our clients is live life to the fullest, whatever that is to you. And it means different things to different people.
It really does. This is Dan. I'm Kamie. Thanks so much for joining us. Again, remember, you can like and subscribe to this channel, and we'll continue to have information for you each week here on this podcast. And if you have any questions or something that you're dealing with, or maybe a loved one is dealing with, please comment below, and we can tackle some of those issues in a later episode. That's all from us. Thanks for joining us.